I made my way back down the hill as the sun began to rise. When I got back to the house, Dee and Dum had prepared breakfast: porridge, fried eggs, and bacon. On the kitchen table stood my school lunch tin. I wondered what they'd packed to sustain me, hopefully for 9 rounds of boxing. They opened the tin to show me 6 pumpkin scones, neatly wrapped in greaseproof paper. "We baked them last night, your favorite," Dum said. I packed all my stuff onto my satchel, including my beautiful boxing boots. At 7:30, I had already said my farewells to my grandpa and my mother, and was sitting on the front wall waiting for the blue prison ute, which was to pick me up. I could have gone to the prison, but Gert said it's only a few minutes out of our way, save the energy for the ring. Gert wasn't like the other warders. He liked to help people, and he once told me he only hit kiffers if they really did wrong. A kiffer hurts also, maybe not like a white man, 'cause they more like monkeys, but they hurt also when you hit them. I saw the ute coming up the hill with Gert at the wheel. Next to him, someone sat reading a newspaper. I couldn't see who it was. Gert stopped outside the gate. "Jump in the back with the other kids, PK," he said cheerfully. I climbed into the back, Gert changed gears, and we pulled away. A 14-year-old boy called Boki D. Bear was in charge, and he told me no one was allowed to stand up. All the other kids were giggling and splurting into their hands as they looked at me. "What's so funny?" I shouted above the sound of the wind and the roar of the engine. Boki D. Bear pointed to the rear window of the driver's cabin. There, framed in the window, wearing his unmistakable Panama hat, was the back of Doc's head. All the kids fell about laughing at my astonishment. I just couldn't believe my good fortune. It was the first time since my arrival by train 3 years earlier that I had left the small town. It was a perfectly clear spring morning as we traveled across the valley toward a row of distant hills. The thornveld and the flat-topped acacia had already broken into electric green leaf. By 9:30 we'd reached Nell's Sprout and drew to a halt in a parking lot behind the town hall. I rushed to open the door of the ute for Doc. His blue eyes were shining, and I think he was almost as excited as I was. "We are together outside again, PK. Is it goot? Ja. Absoldoodle." "How did you escape?" I asked clumsily. He chuckled. "With the permission of the commandant. That's what he wished to see about yesterday." He saw me frown. We both knew the way of the prison system, where nothing is given unless something is taken in return. Doc shrugged. "It is not too much he wants, only that I should play a little chop-in when the Brigadier comes from Pretoria next month." I knew how Doc felt about playing in public. While he had overcome his fear when he triumphed at the Beethoven recital in the market square, Doc was a perfectionist, and it gave him great pain not to meet the standards he demanded for himself. "You should have said no," I said. "Tick, tick, PK. Then I would not see you in your debut. One day I will say. I was there when the welterweight champion of the world made his boxing debut. Absoldoodle. I will play chop-in to his Brigadier. That is not too hard. That is not so hard, Ja." We entered the town hall and walked down a corridor until we reached a room that said Barton Blue on a piece of paper stuck on the door. The room smelt of dust and sweat. Lieutenant Smith and Clip-Clop were both there. This morning was the preliminary fights for the kids, and this afternoon for the weight divisions, Lieutenant Smith announced. "Tonight, starting at 6, the finals. We come here to win, and that is what we are going to do." "Okay, so what's our motto?" "One for all and all for one," we all shouted. Doc put his hand on my shoulder, and I felt very proud. "I wish Jel Piet was with us," I whispered. Then who was in charge of first aid, left to fetch the towels and the first aid kit, but promised to be right back. Clip Cop grinned. Today, man, I'm Gel Piet. Does that mean we can hit you and you can't hit back? Boki the Bear said cheekily, and we all laughed. Clip Cop smiled. You can all get changed now, and I'll fetch you in 15 minutes. I found a corner and put my boots on first. All the kids crowded around. Where'd you get those, man? Boki the Bear exclaimed. My grandpa made them, I stammered. Boy, you lucky having a bootmaker for your grandpa, Foony Kruger said. Well, he's not actually a bootmaker, more a gardener. I rolled my gray socks down so they made a collar just above the boots. Then I put my blue singlet on and the boxing shorts with the yellow stripe down the side. Gail Piet had sized the waist perfectly, but the bottoms of the shorts went way past my knees. When I stood up, the other 4 kids broke up. Maddie, Simon, and Nels Stickhoven even rolled on the floor. I must have looked pretty funny with my sparrow legs sticking out, but I also felt terribly proud. Phony Kruger and myself were the first of the Barberton Blues to fight, as we were in the under 12s, the most junior division. We followed Clip Cop into the town hall. Kids from other towns in the eastern Transvaal were standing in groups, and they too were changed and ready. I looked around, wondering who among them I would have to fight. Doc entered the hall and moved over to me. I think he was more nervous than I was. He had taken out his bandana and was wiping his brow. I think examinations in the conservatorium in Leipzig, when I was so big as you, was not too bad as this. Absolute doodle. I'll be okay, Doc. I'll dance and everything just like Gel Piet says. Lieutenant Smith says I'm blurry fast. You'll see. They won't hit me, for sure. It's nice of you to say this, PK, but what happens when comes one big bore and connects? I grinned, trying to make him feel better. I repeated Happy's comment. Odd, man. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. I felt pretty corny saying it, and I knew now why Happy had said it to me. He must have felt pretty corny too. Doc groaned. PK, I want you should be very careful. In that ring, there are not nice people. Clip Cop and Lieutenant Smith were standing with a large bald man who wore long white pants and a white singlet. A few feet from them stood 2 adults and a kid. The kid was quite a bit bigger than me, though not as big as Snotnose. He wore a red singlet, and on the front was the word Sabi. That was the town where Clip Cop had his Nui, to whom he had recently become engaged. The big man in the singlet looked at me and then at Lieutenant Smith. He is not very big. Are you sure you want him to fight? The lieutenant nodded. It will be good for him. The big man looked at the boy from Sabi and then looked doubtfully back at me. His opponent is 8 inches taller and has probably got 5 inches more reach, man. If I think he's getting hurt, I'll pull him out. I hope you know what you doing, man, the big man said, shaking his head. The 2 men from Sabi were grinning, and I could hear what they were saying inside their heads. They were glad their kid was going to get an easy fight first up. Clip Cop turned to me. This is Mynheer de Klerk, PK. He is the referee and also the judge. He just came down from Pretoria last night. Good morning, Mynheer, I said, sticking out my hand. The referee shook it lightly. The referee shook it lightly. You got nice manners, son, he said. Then Mynheer de Klerk examined both sets of boxing gloves and declared them suitable. 10-ounce gloves. I don't want to see no kid hurt, he said. Okay, glove up. We on in 5 minutes. He turned to a man sitting at the table directly beside the ring. The man nodded and consulted a large pocket watch in front of him. He also had a belt and was obviously the timekeeper. Clip Cop and Lieutenant Smith both worked on lacing me up. I felt very important. Remember, PK, boxing is a percentage game. Just make sure you hit him clean and more times than he hits you. No clinches. In clinches, he can throw you off your feet. Stay out of the corners, stay off the ropes. The man at the table rang the bell and we walked over to the ring. Clip-Clop helped me through the ropes and then he and Lieutenant climbed in after me. There was no proper stool in the corner and Lieutenant Smith told me to sit on it. I felt a bit silly because the kid from Sabi was standing up and punching into the air and I was sitting like a little kid on a chamber pot. Right, both in the middle, Mynheer de Klerk called and climbed into the ring. What's your names? Du Tiot, Mynheer. PK, Mynheer. I want a clean fight, you hear? No clinches. When I say break, you break. No hitting below the waist or behind the head. One knockdown and the fight is over. You understand, PK? Du Tiot? Sure. Ja, Mynheer. We both said. Right. When you hear the bell, you come into the center of the ring, touch gloves, and start boxing. Good luck. I walked back to my corner because it was the first fight of the day. All the teams were gathered around the ring. It was my first boxing crowd, and my heart was beating. Du Tiot was looking around too. I don't think either of us wanted to make eye contact. He seemed very big, but I had waited too long for this moment to be afraid. The bell rang. Boxing, PK, you hear? Clip-Clop said as I jumped from the stool. We touched gloves in the middle of the ring, and as he pulled away, I darted in and snapped a left and right to Du Tiot's jaw. His eyes widened in surprise. I could see that the punches hadn't hurt him, but nevertheless, my early aggression had caught him unawares. He was a good boxer and didn't lose his composure but circled around me. He threw a straight left, which went over my shoulder and flew past my ear. I went in under the arm with a quick uppercut and caught him in the ribs. I knew I'd hit him hard. He caught me with a right on the shoulder and spun me around. I anticipated the left coming at me and ducked under it and got another good body blow on exactly the same spot as before. His arms wrapped around me and I was in a clinch, which I wasn't supposed to be in. I hit him furiously in the ribs with both hands, but my blows were too close to be effective and I knew he could hold me as long as he'd like. Break, I hear the ref say, and as Du Tiot's arms slackened, I got right out the way. For the rest of the round, I let him chase me. I was the much faster boxer and had much better footwork. Toward the end of the round, I could see by the way he set his feet which punch was going to come next. Just as the bell went, I got inside with a short right and clipped him nearly on the point of the chin. I had heard nothing during the fight and now realized that the crowd was making quite a noise and that my name was being shouted in encouragement. At the end of the round, there was a lot of clapping and 1 or 2 whistles. You done good, PK, Clip-Clop said. Lieutenant Smith wiped my face with a towel. He's missing with the right cross, but not by much. Watch it, man. If that kid finds his range, he's going to hurt you bad. Keep your chin buried in your shoulder. That way, if he gets one through, you'll take most of it on the shoulder. The bell went for the second round, and I let D2 chase me around the ring. He must have been told to try to get me into a corner because he would work me carefully toward one, but at the last moment, I'd feint left, and duck out right, and his right cross would miss by miles. But then I did it once too often, and he caught me with the left uppercut in the gut, and had it not been for the ropes behind me, I might have gone down. He knew he'd hurt me and was trying for the big hit. All I could do was duck until I could use my feet to get out of trouble. To my surprise, in the second half of the round, he seemed to be tiring. He'd thrown a lot of punches, most of them landing on my gloves, though he did hit me a good body blow that hurt like hell. I began to move in quickly and pick him off. Toward the end of the round, the crowd was beginning to laugh as I seemed to be able to hit him almost at will. A look of desperation had crept into his face. I didn't think I was hurting him much. but I was making him very tired and very frustrated, just the way Gel Piet had said it must be done. The bell went, and I was sure I had won the round. You don't have to hit him again to win, Lieutenant Smith said. Just stay out of the way, you hear? Just counterpunch, no attack. You going to win this, clear man, unless he cops you a lucky one. The bell went for the final round. Du Tio must have had instructions to nail me because he kept rushing me, throwing wild punches. I'd nail him with a straight left or a right hook as he passed, but I was careful not to get set to throw a big punch. The crowd was laughing as I made him miss, and I was beginning to feel pretty good. I had outboxed him and hadn't been hurt. The bell would go any moment and I'd won. The right cross came at me and I couldn't move out of the way. It smashed into my shoulder and into my face, and I felt as though I had walked into a telegraph pole. I felt myself going and grabbed at the ropes behind me to stop myself falling. The next blow came, but I managed to get my head out of the way. Then D2 threw another right, and it just grazed my face. But my legs felt okay, and my head had cleared. I ducked under a straight right and danced out of the way just as the bell went. Phew. Doc was at the ringside, jumping up and down. 11 out of 10. Absolute, he yelled at me. It was the happiest moment of my life. I had started to move back to my corner when Mynheer de Klerk called us both into the center of the ring. We shook hands and I thanked Dutude for the fight, but I think he knew he'd lost as his eyes brimmed with tears and he didn't reply. Then Mynheer de Klerk took us both by the hand and said, "The winner, 3 rounds to nothing. It's Gentleman PK." He held my hand, and the crowd clapped and laughed at my new name. The Barton Blues all yelled and whistled. "That was good," Lieutenant Smith said. "But it's early times. You were lucky, man." Yay! Woohoo! When I tell you to stay out of the way, you stay out of the way. You hear? The right cross nearly brained you. 2 like earlier in the next bout, and he'd throw in the towel, you understand? I nodded and tried to look contrite. As Clip Clop pulled the big mitts off my hands, I suddenly felt light, as though I were going to float away. It was a wonderful feeling. It was the power of one steering in me. I jumped down from the ring, feeling 10 feet tall. Doc gave me a big hug. "PK, I am very proud today. Absolute-doodle." Such a dancer already. Absolute-doodle. I had never heard so many absolute doodles. Same. Phony Kruger won his fight against a kid from Boxburg, and so did Maddie Simon? Sure. In the under-13s. Nels Stickhoven in the under-14s, and Belky DeBear in the under-15s. I'm telling you, we were a pretty proud lot in the Barberton Blues. Every one of us had advanced to the semis. As Phony Kruger and I were both in the under-12 division, if we got through the semis, we'd be in the final together. But our hopes were soon dashed. There was a kid from Lindenberg called Kroon, who was the biggest 11-year-old I had ever seen, at least a foot higher than me and twice as wide. He wasn't a boxer, but he polished off a kid from Nailsprue in the first round when he sat him on the canvas after about 1 minute. We instantly dubbed into Killer Kroon. We all got scared just looking at him, and Boki said he was glad he wasn't fighting in the under-12 division. Phony Kruger got Killer Kroon in the semis and managed to go 1 round before he was sat on his pants. Seconds after the second round had begun, I think he was glad that it was all over. Killer Kroon had closed his right eye. "It's like boxing a bleary gorilla," he said when he climbed down from the ring. Just before lunch, I entered the ring again to fight a kid from Kapamuden. He had a square-built sort of bloke and very strong around the shoulders, but not a lot taller than me. It was the first time I had stood up to another boxer whose chin level wasn't above my head. It was a good fight, and my speed saved me from taking the weight of his blows. He hit hard and straight, but I was able to move away as the punch came, so so the sting had gone out of it. Nevertheless, he landed quite a lot of punches and was scoring well. Before the final round began, Lieutenant Smith wiped my face. "You're not doing enough to make certain of this fight. Watch his straight left. He keeps dropping his right glove after he's thrown the left. Get in under the blow and work him with both hands to the body. I want to make certain you got enough points." We touched gloves for the final round, and Lieutenant Smith was quite right. The kid, whose name was Gelden Hughes, threw his left and then curiously dropped his right. I went in underneath and got 5 or 6 good blows to the body before he pushed me away. The final bell went, and Mynheer de Klerk announced for the second time that day the winner in 2 out of 3 rounds, Gentleman PK. The crowd laughed and clapped, and the Barberton Blues went wild. Doc could hardly contain himself. Not even one scratch. Black eye. Not even one. Perfect. You should play choppin' as good as this, Ja? He laughed and handed me a towel. "Lieutenant Smith says you must have a shower and change into your clothes again. Tonight, 6 o'clock, we fight again." He suddenly grew serious. "PK, in the finals is a big bower. You must dance very gut. You must box like a Mozart piano concerto, fast and light with perfect timing, Ja?" After lunch, Doc made me lie down. Despite the heat, he threw a blanket over me, and to my surprise, I fell asleep. It was 5 o'clock when he came to fetch me, and I felt a little stiff and sore. He made me have a warm shower before he changed into my boxing things again. By the time we got back into the hall, it was almost 6, and the preliminaries were over. Boki the Bear said 5 of the Barberton Blues were through to the finals, including Gert. I went over to Gert to congratulate him. It wasn't too hard, PK. I think I got lucky. But like you, man, I got a bower in the finals as big as a mountain, a super heavyweight. He won both his fights on knockouts in the first. "You got the speed. Speed is everything," I quoted Gil Piet. "Not if he gets me in a corner," Gert said solemnly. "Then stay out of corners, man," I said flippantly, but the advice was meant as much for myself as for him. You won soon, PK. You can do it, I'm telling you." But I could hear him talking in his head, and he was very worried about me. Fonny Kruger came over and said the Lieutenant Smith wanted me. Lieutenant Smith and Clip Clop were in earnest conversation with Mynheer de Klerk. "The Bower kid has thirst. Maybe 40 pounds on yours." "I don't like it one bit," the referee was saying. "You saw him in the other 2 fights. He hardly got touched. Our kid's a good boxer," Clip Clop said. "He's the best I've seen in a long time, but he's a midget compared to Kroon. Kroon dropped both his opponents in the first. That's a bad kid. I work with young boxers every day. I'm telling you, this kid is not a sportsman." Mynheer de Klerk threw his hands open. "There's plenty of time. Let the boy grow a bit. Wait till next year. He's champion material, too good to spoil with a mismatch." I could see a hesitant look cross Lieutenant Smith's face. The voices going on inside his head were confused. My heart was going boom, boom, and there was a huge aching lump in my throat. Then he squinted at the bald referee. "I make you this promise, Mynheer de Klerk. If my boy even looks like being hurt, we throw in the towel. You don't know, PK. That kid has worked 3 years for this fight. I can't pull him out without giving him a chance. I'll give him 1 round, Smith. If he even looks like being hit in the first round, I'm giving the fight to Kroon on a TKO. You understand?" Lieutenant Smith nodded his head. He turned and saw me, and I grinned at him. They had to give me a go. I had to fight Kroon. Kroon was no bigger than me than a jackhammer Smith was to Hoppy. I could take him. I knew it. "We got to glove up now, PK," Lieutenant Smith said. I climbed into the ring and sat on the stool. And Killer Kroon also sat on his. He stared directly at me. Shit. He was big. He had a grin on his face, and I could hear his conversation to himself. "I'm going to knock this little kid out." First round. With the arrival of the townspeople for the finals, the town hall was at least half full. I remembered Doc's words, "You must box like a Mozart piano concerto." In my head, I could hear the way Doc would play a Mozart concerto. No arpeggio, fast and straight, the timing perfect. It made sense to box Killer Kroon in the same way. "Never mind his head, PK. You just keep landing them to the body. Quick punches in and out with both hands. Scoring shots. Stay out of reach and don't let him get you against the ropes. You box him in the middle of the ring. Make him work. Make him chase you all the time. You hear? I listened to them carefully, but I knew the real answer came from Jail Piet. That I had to box with my feet. I had no idea what sort of boxer Killer Kroon was. His first opponent had lasted less than a minute, and Funi went down a few seconds into the second round, but had spent all the first backpedaling. As I sat there waiting, Kroon stared at me with an evil grin, and the feeling of being in front of the judge came back to me, and the ring became the dormitory, and the audience the jury. I closed my eyes and counted from 10 to 1. I stood on a rock just below the full moon, the roar of the falls in my ears. Okay. The river and the gorge and the African veld stretched out below me in the silver light. I was a young Zulu warrior who had killed his first lion, and I would feel the lion's skin skirt around my hips, the tail of the lion wrapped around my waist. I took a deep breath and jumped the first of the falls into a pool lashed with white spray, rose to the surface and was swept to the rim of the second, plunged downward and rose again, to be swept to the edge of the third pool, where I fell again. Rising to the surface at the bottom of the falls, where the first of the stepping stones shone wet in the moonlight, I crossed the 10 stones to the other side and opened my eyes and looked directly at Kroon. Killer Kroon saw something in my eyes that made him turn away and not look at me again. The referee called us up, and taking us by the wrist, he held our hands in the air. On my left, Dames and Heary, gentleman piqué of the Barberton Blues. The crowd gave me a big hand, although this was mixed with laughter. They saw my size next to Killer Kroon. On my right, from Lindenberg, Martinus Kroon. The crowd had already chosen sides, and with the exception of the Lindenberg squad, the clapping was only polite. The bell went for the first round, and I sprang from my stool while Killer Kroon got up slowly, almost disdainfully. We moved to the center of the ring, and he threw a left at my head, which only came up to below his shoulder. I could see it coming for miles and let it pass my ear. He followed with a right, and I ducked under the punch. It was almost the same opening Detute used, and I followed it the same way with my left and a right under Kroon's heart. I got some body behind the 2 punches, but he didn't even seem to notice. I danced quickly out the way, and a clumsy uppercut with his left missed my chin by 6 inches. I stayed in the center of the ring, moving around Kroon, who threw 4 more punches and missed. He threw another right that parted my hair, but the punch was too hard, throwing him off balance. I moved in fast and hit the same spot under the heart with the left and the right combination, which I repeated 4 good short punches. But I had been too greedy, getting the extra 2 punches home. His huge arms locked around me, and lifting me bodily, he threw me away from him. I was sent spinning across the ring, my legs working like pistons to keep me on my feet. I bounced into the ropes and grabbed the middle one with both arms to steady myself. I was wide open as a straight right came at me. It should have been an uppercut. I was against the ropes and would not have been able to move out of the way. To put everything he had into that punch, Killer Kroon had pulled his shoulder back just a fraction too far. It allowed me a split second to move my head to the right. The blow caught my ear, and it felt like a branding iron had been punched into the side of my head. But I had taken worse from the judge, and I feinted left and moved off the ropes under his right arm. He turned quickly, but my feet were already in position, and he walked into a perfectly timed right cross, coming at him with the full weight of my body behind it. The punch landed flesh on the point of his chin, and his head snapped back. I knew I had hurt him. It was the best punch I had ever thrown by far. Gert said later, had I been nearer to Killer Kroon's size, he'd have been out for a week. Kroon shook his head in bewilderment. He was hurt, and he was mad, and he was coming for me. I stayed out of his way, taking a straight left on the shoulder, moving away, and managed 2 more good punches to the spot under his heart, which had developed a red patch. The bell went for the end of round 1, and I returned to my corner. I could see a grin on Muir de Klerk's face. Doc was standing outside the ring in my corner as Lieutenant Smith and Clip Cop climbed in to attend to me. He had his bandana in both hands and was twisting it round and round. "You done good," Clip Cop said. Lieutenant Smith smeared Vaseline over the ear where Kroon had glanced his big hit off me. He covered my good ear with his hand. Can you hear me, PK? He spoke from the side I'd been hit on. Ja, Lieutenant, I hear you good. I replied, if a thick ear is all we got, get out of this fight, we'll be blurry lucky. He turned to Clip Clop. Give him another half glass of water, rinse only, don't swallow. Now listen good, PK. It looks like this gorilla's only got 4 punches, straight right, straight left, right cross, and left uppercut. He's a fighter and he's never needed any more than those. Everyone is a good punch and he throws them well, except the left uppercut is a bit clumsy and he tries to hit too hard with the right cross so you can see it coming. You done good to move under it and hit him under the heart. He's very strong, but if you can get in enough of those, they'll count in the end and you'll slow him down for the third. You must keep moving, you hear? Make him work. He's not as fit as you are, and keep hitting him on that spot under the heart, okay? I had never heard Lieutenant Smith talk so fast, and listening to what he was saying, I could see he now thought I had a chance. No more attack, you hear? Only counterpunch. I nodded and the bell went for the second round. Kroon came storming out of his corner, and I could see from the look in his eyes that he wanted to finish the fight. For the first half of the round, I ducked and weaved and backpedaled and moved him around. He must have thrown 50 punches without landing even one. The crowd was beginning to laugh as he repeatedly missed. Toward the second half of the round, he slowed down a little, and his right cross wasn't coming quite as fast. He was breathing heavily. I moved up a little closer and started coming in under the right cross again to land on the same spot under the heart time and time again. I couldn't believe his lack of imagination. His breathing was getting heavier and heavier as he grunted as I landed a left and a right, and I realized that my punches were beginning to hurt him. I was getting pretty tired myself. Then the bell sounded for the end of the second round. The crowd stood and clapped. As I returned to my corner, I looked toward Doc. He had the bandana in his mouth and he was chewing on it. He's going to try and finish you this round, PK. You got both rounds. You miles ahead on points. He is going to try to put you down, Lieutenant Smith. Usually calm voice was gone. Stay away, man. I don't care if you don't land a single punch. Just keep clear, you hear? Keep clear. You got this fight won. Majiteg? Sure. You boxing good. His eyes were shining. The bell for the final round went, and we met in the center of the ring and touched gloves. Killer Kroon was still breathing hard, and his chest was heaving. As we moved away, he said, I'm going to kill you, you blurry Runek. Gel Piet said you always had to answer back, so they knew you weren't afraid. Come and get me, you Bauer bastard. I shot back at him. He rushed at me, and I stepped aside, but his swinging arm caught me as he passed and knocked me off my feet. It wasn't a punch. It was the inside of his arm, but it sat me down. I couldn't believe it had happened. One knockdown and you lose the fight. I had opened my mouth to talk, lost my concentration, and lost the fight. I couldn't believe it was me sitting on the canvas. There was a roaring in my ears and a terrible despair in my heart. No knockdown. Continue to box, I heard Mynheer de Klerk shout. As though in a dream, I was coming to my feet, but the thought of defeat had drowned my senses. Killer Kroon rushed in, and that clumsy left uppercut just missed my chin. This time, he should have used the right cross, as I couldn't move upward to my feet and sideways at the same time. A right cross would have caught me flush on the chin and finished me for keeps. Instead, I simply moved my head backward, and the uppercut whizzed safely past the point of my chin. I was back on my toes and dancing out of reach, moving around him. He couldn't box for toffee. No way was he going to get a second chance at me. I began to realize that there was something wrong with him. His breath was coming in rasps, and his chest was heaving. His punches had lost their zing. I moved up, and I hit him as hard as I could with a two-fisted attack to the spot under his heart, and his hands fell to his sides. His gloves came around my waist, and there was hardly any strength left in him, and he leaned heavily on me, his gloves working up and down my waist. The thumb of his glove must have caught the elastic band of my shorts, for they slipped neatly over my hips and fell to my ankles. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't step backward for fear of falling. Anyway, his weight made it impossible to move, so I just stood there and hit him again and again. My bare arse pointed to the pointed at the crowd. When he gave me a last desperate punch and I tripped over the shorts, I fell down. I tried to pull my pants up with my boxing gloves, but without success. The crowd was convulsed with laughter, and Killer Croon was standing over me with his hands on his knees, rasping and wheezing and trying to take in air. "No knockdown," Mynheer de Kloot shouted. "Get back to your corner, Croon." He jerked me to my feet and pulled my pants up. I had been covering my snake with my gloves. In those days, nobody wore underpants, but I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was Killer Croon in the ring with me. "Box on, Mynheer de Klerk," said. I turned to face Killer Croon's corner. He was standing with his back to me, and his chest was still heaving. Suddenly, a towel lofted over his head and landed at my feet. Croon's corner was throwing in the towel. The fight was over. Mynheer de Klerk moved quickly over to me, and with a huge grin on his face, held my hand aloft. "Winner on a technical knockout, Gentleman PK," he announced. The crowd shouted and cheered, and Lieutenant Smith and Clip Clop jumped into the ring. Clip Clop lifted me high above his shoulders and turned around in the ring, and everybody went wild. Mynheer de Klerk had moved over to Croon's corner, and now he had come back to the center of the ring and held his hand up for silence. Clip Clop put me down again. "The Lindenberg squad want me to say that Martinus Croon retired because of an asthma attack." A section of the crowd started to boo, and there was general laughter. "More like a runic attack," someone shouted. The referee held up his hand once more. "I just want you to know that I had the fight scored 2-0 for Gentleman PK, and I also had him ahead on points in the third round. The technical knockout stands. Let me tell you something. This boy is going to be a great boxer. Just remember where you saw him first." The crowd whistled and stomped and cheered, and Lieutenant Smith held my hand up, and then we left the ring. "I think Gel Piet, and the people will be very happy tonight," Doc said as he handed me a towel. "I go to get you a soft drink. What color do you want?" "Well, we haven't got any money," I said. "That's what you think, Mr. Schmarty Pants." Doc fished into his pocket and produced 2 half-crowns. "5 shillings, I said in amazement. He grinned slyly. "I am making this bet with a nice man from Lindenberg." "I bet? You bet on me? What if I'd lost? You couldn't have paid him." Doc scratched his nose with his forefinger. "You couldn't lose. You was playing Mozart," he said. I asked for an American cream soda. It was the drink Hoppy had bought me in the cafe at Gravelotti, and it was still my favorite. It was also the closest I could come to sharing my win with Hoppy. If Gel Piet and Hoppy could have been there, everything would have been perfect. Not that it wasn't perfect, but more perfect.